Hi, my name is Jonathan Eaton. I'm a PhD candidate in anthropology at UBC. My research is at the intersection of two concepts that are rarely placed in conversation with one another: heritage and disaster. But before I get into that, I'd like to tell you the story of the big one. The big one is an earthquake that happened long ago and also one that hasn't happened yet. Hopefully, if you live in the Pacific Northwest, you know what I'm talking about. It's estimated there's a 30% chance that a damaging earthquake will strike this area sometime in the next 50 years. The big one is a subduction zone earthquake that could reach a magnitude of 9, ranking it among the largest ever recorded. The megaquake and tsunami it would unleash is expected to cause thousands of deaths, to displace upwards of 1 million people, and to leave communities completely without services for weeks or months. I grew up in this region in western Washington state, and I first heard about the big one as an impressionable young Boy Scout. I remember a presentation about earthquake preparedness at a Boy Scout meeting, where an old man ranted passionately about the dangers of the big one while wielding a portrait he himself had painted where a monster wave was heaving an oil tanker over our local lighthouse. As widely known as it may be, our understanding of the big one is still evolving. Only within the past few decades has there been wide consensus about this threat to our region. We came to that knowledge through various sources. One is through indigenous oral histories that tell of spirits and ancestors shaking the ground and entire villages disappearing into the sea. Another is the presence of ghost forests along the coast of the Pacific Northwest, filled with trees that died suddenly when the ground sank abruptly and salt water flooded in. Another is the record of an orphan tsunami that hit Japan with no earthquake felt, meaning the wave had traveled across the Pacific Ocean. From all these key pieces of information, we're able to piece together a history of major earthquakes in a region otherwise known to be generally quiet. We can even precisely date the last big one to January 26, 1700, well before anyone alive today, and we know they've tended to reoccur every few hundred years for the past 10,000. So the first part of my research is concerned with the varying ways that people respond to that knowledge of impending but uncertain disaster. At home, we have a partially completed earthquake kit that we can never seem to find the time to finalize. Space blankets aplenty, but no water. That knowledge of all the efforts going into preparation for a major earthquake that we don't know when will occur made me interested in doing this project. But such a disaster would not strike Vancouver in isolation. People in the city aren't just sitting around stocking up on space blankets and readying themselves for the big one. They're also facing a climate emergency, an affordability crisis, and a global pandemic. These overlapping crises have profound effects on people's lives, exacerbating existing inequalities as they take the greatest toll on the most vulnerable. My research is looking into how people respond to these converging crises. The policy decisions that are made prior to disaster and the money spent on mitigation tells a tale of what people value. For example, the Museum of Anthropology at UBC, whose Great Hall has been described as one of the most seismically dangerous buildings in the city, recently began a multi-million-dollar project to retrofit the building, including placing the entire Great Hall on base isolators, which are designed to completely absorb seismic waves to protect both the building and the collections and people inside. Another example is that of Vancouver's schools. Some of these are being preserved through seismic retrofits, like the Museum of Anthropology, while others are being torn down and replaced with buildings that are not meant to survive a major earthquake themselves, but only to protect the lives of the occupants inside. This illustrates a major tension between basic standards of life safety and the higher but more costly standards of preserving the function of neighborhood services, amenities, and landmarks such as schools. These are value decisions being made, which brings me to the second part of my research, heritage. How does heritage relate to all of this? The concept of heritage is one that highlights the relationships people have with place. Heritage is not just about preserving historic buildings. It's also the ways people live and connect with each other in their communities. It's the languages they speak, art, music, and food they produce, and many other things that tie them to their home and to each other. My research highlights the ways that heritage can play a role in planning for disasters, especially long-term disaster recovery, because it highlights what people value about their communities. and what aspects of their community they'd like to preserve following a disaster. Often, in the immediate aftermath, decisions are made very quickly about how to rebuild, decisions that can affect the landscape for generations. Because of this, we have to plan for recovery in an inclusive way, taking into consideration the things that people care about. So in addition to digesting city policy on disasters, I'm working with groups in two very different Vancouver neighborhoods, Dunbar and Grandview, that are navigating issues related to heritage, disasters, and the future of their neighborhoods for themselves. The Grandview Heritage Group bonds around the lively character and diverse history of their neighborhood, while the Dunbar Earthquake and Emergency Preparedness Group brings neighbors together to meet each other and plan for disasters. I see both of these efforts as part of a holistic disaster planning, because both are bringing neighbors together and building a sense of community around a shared set of values. Oftentimes, disaster planning is left up to the experts, engineers, emergency managers, first responders, and they play an essential role in protecting lives and infrastructure. At the same time, in a big disaster, the first responders are often our neighbors. Communities with deep social cohesion are the ones that recover the quickest after disaster. So when the big one comes, yes, we need our emergency kits, and yes, we need safe buildings, but we also need strong and cohesive communities that are committed to each other and to the place that they call home. With a clear understanding of their heritage and values, people can plan for disasters while also setting the stage for recovery.